Hello, I'm Zack Stanton,
And I'm Megan Messerly. It's Friday, July 11th.
and this is the Playbook Podcast. Megan, thanks so much for joining us here at the end of another busy week here in Washington.
Every week is busy. We just live to work here in Washington.
We do live to work. Yes, indeed. And so, without further ado, here are the topics driving the day. The first big thing, and this is really big picture, is that somewhat quietly, we seem to have maybe entered a new phase of the Trump presidency. Now, what do I mean by that? Totally fair question. Typically, any new administration enjoys a window of time, usually 6 months, maybe a year, where they can pursue one or two big legislative priorities before Congress focuses on the midterm elections. Now, these are the sort of household name accomplishments that many of us can remember. With Biden, it was Build Back Better, which he passed and signed in fall of 2021. With Trump, the first time around, it was the 2017 tax cuts. With Obama, there was the Recovery Act. And then because he had such gigantic congressional majorities for Democrats, the Affordable Care Act, which spilled over into 2010. And now that Trump has signed the Republican megabill into law, it seems like that window for further congressional action on his agenda may have closed a little bit. And there was a report out from our friends slash colleagues slash competitors at The Atlantic yesterday that the White House perhaps won't push for another big legislative package between now and next November. Megan, I'm really curious what you are hearing from your sources in the administration, from folks in the White House. Obviously, they have a whole lot going on. Do you have a sense of how they're shifting their focus at this moment in time?
It really does feel like we're at this inflection point in the administration, right? It's July. We're more than halfway through the year. They did get this massive domestic policy legislation across the finish line, which the White House has seen as crucial to getting done before the midterm elections. They wanted it done early so that some of the economic provisions, like no taxes on tips, no taxes on Social Security, would have time to take effect before the midterm elections. And so we're now at this point of transition where obviously there are still other big priorities the White House wants to get done. I've been following closely the trade conversation. Tariffs is always and forever on the table. So we have that. We have this rescissions package working its way through Congress that needs to get done in the next week or so. And so you have these real things on the table that need to get done. But at the same time, especially this week, I feel it in my conversations more so than I did before, like the looming midterm elections just hanging over us and like pressing down in a way that it really hasn't because we've just been so focused on this big, beautiful bill.
Totally. And, from one point of view, Trump, even though he's not going to be on the ballot in 2026, he's kind of on the ballot in some sense. And this is the last time he'll really be on the ballot in any meaningful way. And there's been a fair amount of reporting over the last couple days that he's really invested at this point in these conversations in ways that he hasn't always been in the past, that he's had these meetings with Senate Majority Leader John Thune to talk about the Senate majority. We've had reports that the White House has pushed big Republican-led states like Texas in particular to look at mid-cycle redistricting, which is quite a weapon if they want to use it, to try and squeeze out a few more Republican seats to pad their majority in the House, which they're worried about losing. But there's even been talk in recent days about the Senate majority perhaps being at play, which is not something that anyone really thought was going to happen, and still seems like a bit of a reach for Democrats. How plugged in to these conversations is Trump at this moment?
I mean, he's definitely plugged in. And again, I think as we're seeing this transition, I mean, he's making that transition as well. He was spending much of the last couple weeks making calls to folks in Congress to try to get them to vote for his bill. And now it's about what are we doing about the midterms, right? Same calls, different topic. And I think what we're really seeing happen here is two things. I think one, there's this short-term goal of the midterm elections. Obviously, it's really important to the president that Republicans remain in control. If that doesn't happen, he could end up in the situation he was in the first term where he's just facing these impeachment fights. That is not not where he wants to be for the last 2 years of his term. So there's obviously this very short term goal. Also, he wants to win, right? The president loves winning, and he's not going to want to lose the chambers of Congress, right? Because that will be put on him to at least some degree. And then the other thing that I've just been thinking and talking a lot with folks about too this week, again, as it feels like we're kind of in this transition moment, is just the future of the Republican Party and Trump's legacy. It feels like we're also at this point where this also is defining that moment, right? It's not just about the
Mm.
midterms, it's about what legacy the president wants to leave and also setting things up for, dare I say, the 2028 presidential election and thinking about where the Republican Party goes from here, right? So both short-term and long-term stakes.
Yeah, and that really brings us into the second thing that I wanted to talk about, which is the politics and the messaging of all of this. And that Trump, more than most politicians, more than most people, sort of innately grasps that there's this reality that drives a lot of media attention, drives our modern moment in many respects, where there are so many things vying for your attention, which is that attention oftentimes means power. And the way to get attention a lot of the time is to generate conflict. And that seems like a lot of the actions that the Trump administration is taking at this moment in time in particular is aimed at doing something that's pretty valuable in politics, which is picking the fights that they want. When we have these gigantic immigration raids, as we've seen in California in recent days, there was just a gigantic one yesterday in an agricultural area of California where there was smoke bombs that were deployed. There's a reason for these confrontations. There's a reason for the theatricality of them. On some level, the confrontation is kind of the point here.
Absolutely. It's absolutely the point. And look, I'm from Southern California. I have friends and family who just tell me that everyone's thinking about immigration and raids. Like it's just on everyone's mind. And it's the thing people are talking about in Southern California right now, to the point of the conflict being sort of the point. The president really is trying to instill this culture of fear, and folks are afraid. And that is the goal. The president wants to make these high profile examples, whether it's a car wash or an agricultural facility or what have you, to instill this fear to get people to self deport. We've seen border crossings, right?
Hmm.
The goal here is to use this and to use sort of the theatricality of this moment, sort of a grim theatricality, but to use that to really enact policy change. And so it's not
Absolutely.
just the visuals, there really is a purpose behind it.
Yeah, and to me, it's a similar story as his fights that he picks in Washington, where for all the talk about him going after institutions, there's a reason for that. A lot of Americans have soured on institutions. That's part of the reason that he's in power, is that a lot of Americans feel like politics hasn't really been working for them. They don't see it responding to their own lives, to their own struggles. And so when Trump's administration is picking a fight with the Department of Justice or cutting foreign aid or slashing thousands of jobs in the State Department, there's a reason for these things. These are fights that they kind of want. They want to be seen as the outsiders fighting the institutions, even as he's the most powerful person in the world, even as he is the president of the United States. There's a real political advantage to still seeming like you're an outsider at this moment in time.
Talking to folks in the broader MAGA world, like they absolutely still see themselves as the underdog, even though you have a president who won the popular vote. They are
Right.
in power. They are affecting a significant amount of change because they are in power. And yet they really do have this sort of scrappy underdog mentality. That's how they see themselves, right? And I think that's really crucial to sort of understanding the moment we're in. I think the question is, are voters seeing this that way? The
Hmm.
president was elected on these populist ideals. This is one of the criticisms of the so-called big beautiful bill, is that maybe it's not quite populist enough in nature. And I think that's the nature of the president, is he attracts all these different people to his orbit. And now we're going to really see, push come to shove, what does that actually mean? Is he using this power that these voters have given him to accomplish the things they thought they were going to? And so that is the challenge. Are they still going to see him as this underdog who's fighting for them? Or are they going to say, hey, like, this is not quite what I elected you to do. I thought I was electing you to do X, Y, and Z. I thought I was electing you to lower prices. Folks have different visions, I think, about what it ultimately was that they wanted him to accomplish. And I think we're now entering the phase where he's done enough, where voters are going to start having more concrete thoughts and opinions as they start tuning back into the political process. And we sort of see what the ramifications of that are.
And it's sort of a tricky thing, too, because even as you want to be seen as an outsider, there are these moments in time where you have to be seen as the president. And today, as President Trump is in Texas touring the areas of the state that have been ravaged by the floods and where more than 100 people have died, including a large number of children, this is a moment where you want to be the consoler in chief, where you want to be the president in a way where you can't be the outsider. You want to be the insider who's there and showing people that we're all in this together. And for all of the criticisms that his administration has faced related to things like cuts to the NOAA and to the National Weather Service, this seems like a moment for him to try and maybe change the narrative a little bit about some of the criticisms that they faced related to the flooding.
Absolutely. They definitely want him to come in and present this sympathetic image, and he's absolutely capable of it. If you think about one of the moments that stuck with me from recent weeks is the NATO summit in the Netherlands, where he was asked this question by a Ukrainian journalist, and he was really prompting her on, did you flee? Where's your husband? Where's your family? Where's your kids? And, I think sometimes folks kind of forget that he strangely can have this sort of ability to really connect with people and be kind of charming in certain moments. That is the version that the White House would really like to see on display today in Texas. But at the same time, they are confronting these very real criticisms of, okay, meteorologists say we knew this was coming, we did what we could, but there's real questions about, okay, early warning systems. There's bigger questions about with the cuts that have been made to the National Weather Service and to FEMA, we're heading into hurricane season, right? I think this event has sort of been a wake-up call for a lot of folks as they think about what is that actually going to look like in the coming months. The White House is going to see this as an opportunity to sort of make their case, tell folks, no, it's going to be fine, like telegraph confidence. But at the same time, I think it is highlighting a lot of the potential here for real disaster and real problems in the months to come.
We often try to end the show with something more lighthearted from the Playbook newsletter. And Megan, I am told by our producer, Callie, that the so-called Fab Five from Netflix's Queer Eye have descended on Washington to film their final season. I, for one, am curious how they'll approach trying to make over the gingham-clad masses of men who populate large swaths of the city. I don't know what you're going to be watching for, but it seems like there's ample opportunity here to make people over.
There absolutely is. I can imagine a segment where they're telling here's how to talk about more than just work when you're out socializing with people. I feel like that could be a really good social lesson. Certainly, we could see some makeovers with some more, maybe interesting clothing. But yeah, it will be absolutely interesting to see how they take on Washington.
Yeah, I'm curious. People always ask, what do you do? For those of you who maybe listen to the show but aren't in Washington, the what do you do question inevitably is one of the first things you're asked in most social settings here. Another thing that I've noticed that I'm sure you've noticed as well, Megan, is that some people, rather than say nice to meet you, will just say nice to see you.
Yes.
Because they don't want to give you the impression that maybe they have met you before but don't remember you. So They'll say nice to see you.
Absolutely.
I'm curious how all the Washingtonese of all of this gets absorbed and maybe reacted to by the Queer Eye crowd. But when Callie mentioned this in our group chat yesterday, my brain immediately recalls something that for some reason I've been holding on to for 20 some years at this point, which is that back when the show Queer Eye for the Straight Guy was originally on NBC or Bravo, they briefly talked about giving a makeover to then Apprentice star Donald Trump and even floated redoing his hair. And I don't really have a grand insight there, but that's just a moment where you really wonder, I think he made the right choice in some respects not to get the makeover because his hair, say what you will about it, is sort of iconic. It's part of his image, but how different things could be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He wouldn't be the same Donald Trump if he had had that makeover.
Not at all. Those of you out there, please feel free to send us your Playbookers tips, birthdays, or spotted moments to playbook@politico.com. Megan, thanks. This was great.
Thanks for having me.
And that's all for today's show, but we'll have much more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. The show will be back Monday. Have a great weekend.